I really wanted to get out and get this engine in the car. It was cold and I had to motivate myself to do it. I've been watching my new buddy Dakota Diesel working on his Terminator, and it's a blizzard outside and he's in his garage working on his Terminator, doing a lot of really good things to it. So I thought, I need to not be such a wuss about it and put some warm clothes on and go outside. So anyway, here's the engine in the car finally. I removed it a couple of times. Here you can see that I have the motor mount bolts are in now finally, and the motor mounts are bolted up. Here you can see the torque converter bolt on there now. See, do not tighten those torque converter bolts until the transmission is completely snug down against the block, because it will pull the converter forward, and I think that's the problem I was having. So there's the starter in place. Saved my fast food bags and I put all the bolts and hardware in them and try to label them. But anyway, getting the AC compressor bolted to the block. Be careful because the timing cover that it bolts to on the front bolts is aluminum and you don't want to cross thread or strip them. This is the bracket that holds the wiring harness. It goes on one of the motor mount bolts on the lower one, and then a nut goes over it. Here's a ground strap on the driver's side, same thing. The motor mount has a stud with a ability to put the ground on there, and then a nut. Next, I wanted to go ahead and put the power steering on, but remember to make sure to plug in the cam position sensor first, because a lot of people don't do that and the car won't start and they don't know why, and they're having issues with the car, and it's because this hides behind the bracket for the power steering. And this is easy to miss, and so be very careful. Make sure you get that plugged in so that you're not having issues. I like it when the car starts up the first time. Look at me trying to get that on right. There we go. You'd think I've never done this before. But anyway, that's right there behind the power steering bracket, and so that's all bolted up. It goes on the timing cover. Finally, I can take this thing off. This is from the Grand Marquis, and it's been on there this whole time, and it's kind of ugly. I just want to get it off of there, so finally I can get that out of here. During this whole struggle, I did punch holes in that tape, and yes, I took off my sock and stuffed it in the intake runner because I did not want anything or a nut or a bolt or anything falling down in there and ruining the engine. And speaking of that, it was time to take off the tape, and I wanted to go ahead and turn on the shop vac and suck out anything from the valley of the engine. There actually was a bunch of little tiny pieces of paint chips from the engine hoist that had fallen into the valley during all the struggle. So I wanted to vacuum all of those out, as well as take the tape off the intake manifold and suck out the runners just in case anything had fallen in there. I really made a mess on the side of this car, so I wanted to clean it up. So I went ahead and took the time real quick to wipe all of this. This is actually transmission fluid that was on my hands and then getting it out from under the car a million times, so went ahead and cleaned that up. I love to take care of my stuff, and it was just bothering me how filthy this got. Clean up that GT badge, the wonderful V8 GT badge. So time to get the intake manifold on the car, and it has the fuel rail and everything still on it. I got the intake manifold gaskets, and I have the tape off now, as you can see in this clip. Took the tape off of the intake runners and wanted to go through there and suck it all out. Also, use a straw and sucked out all the spark plug holes. I've done this on my other engines. I probably should have done it earlier when the engine was off the car, but I did remember to do it before, and look, I got a rock out of there. I did not want that falling into the intake runner. But anyway, I did remember to do it, and went ahead and torqued down the spark plugs to make sure that they were all tight. I actually did remove one and make sure that it looked good, and they looked really nice. And so I wanted to go through there and torque these down to 18 foot-pounds and just make sure none of them are loose. And this is a really good time to do it because the intake manifold and the cold air intake and all that stuff isn't in the way. So here come the intake manifold gaskets, and I did put a little bit of RTV around the coolant passages on the back side because I didn't want any leaks there. These heads looked great. When I did the intake manifold on my sister's GT, my old car, the aluminum was pitting around the coolant passage, so I had to put some RTV on that and smooth it out too. So in this case I just put a little there to make sure that it didn't leak, and those gaskets set in there very nice. and they looked really good. So next is putting the intake manifold in, and the most difficult part about this is pulling the EGR back away from it while sliding it down, because the front of it's a lot higher than the rest. But I did want to test fit this. I actually did this a couple of times, and I was scared that something may have fallen down into one of the runners, so I took it off again and vacuumed it out. I've done that several times, even with a supercharger on my Cobra. I made sure I took the whole thing off again just to make sure nothing had fallen down in there. I wanted to clean out this coolant. This is the upper radiator hose housing, and it goes on the intake manifold. And I just wanted to wire brush it and clean it. And inside it had like rust buildup, and I really cleaned it out. And then I took a Scotch-Brite and I just rubbed it all over the rim to make sure there'd be a nice um, mating surface for the coolant hose. And I just wanted to make sure that that was all clean and ready to go. So next I went through, after snugging down the intake manifold, I went back and not only did I torque them to spec, but I torqued them in sequence. There is a sequence on where you need to go, and so I went back and forth doing that until they were all snug and right, making sure that everything was torqued down to spec. So there's the engine in the car. I love the running pony on the plenum on top there. That's so cool. I love that Mustang did that since 96 to 04 on the GTs. I really like that. So next I put in all the ignition coils, and I put them in with these things all snug. And then I went back through and did the fuel injectors. Now look, the fuel injector harness, I noticed on one of them was missing the rubber insulator, and that's something to be careful about when you're putting all this in, is make sure it has everything. Now I have this whole extra harness from the other engine, and look, it's missing a couple in there too, but I did find one to pull out of here and use, and so that was nice to have that extra part. There it is. It just slides right in. I used a flathead screwdriver to push it in where I wanted. I put a stock intake on the car. I like it so much better than the really ghetto intake that this car had on it before. It was just really poorly done. So then I plugged in the fuel rail, the throttle cable there, and man, this hose is not the factory hose for the heater core. That was pinched when I bought the car, and I think that's what may have blown the head gasket, because it wasn't getting the coolant flow it needed. So I think it overheated from that reason. And so I'll show you what I did to fix that later. But I got the EGR in, all the vacuum lines, whatever canister that is, there's vacuum lines on it too. The little ground thing down here, and just going over everything, making sure it was all snug down. There was always something to double check, you know, making sure you got it all right. The cruise control is the black one there, and just getting all these fuel rail bolts in snug. There's the throttle cable. It goes in there like that, and that looks really good. And just, oh, look, here's something I forgot. It was the mass airflow sensor, and I dug under there and found it and plugged it in. So there we go. Mass airflow plugged in. Click. Now, some years GTs actually had another sensor underneath the air intake there for the IAT, but the 03 has it integrated into the mass airflow. So this is what I did with that coolant hose. See, it was pinched so bad, and I really wanted to just get a replacement for it, but I forgot to get one, so I made one up with that nice copper elbow, and it seems like it worked out nicely. So next, the radiator fan and the coolant reservoir need to go on, and plug in all those switches too. And I went and got this Teflon washer that goes for the power steering line down here. This is something a lot of people don't know about, but it actually needs a Teflon washer on the power steering line, which is difficult to get on. You have to use your fingernails and kind of pry it down. I also got this rubber piece off of the drain plug off the Crown Vic and used it on this car, because even with the drain plug in, it was kind of leaking a little bit. And as you can see, I have a brand new Motorcraft filter for the car. and the drain plug like I was telling about, and all new fluids. So I added all the oil, power steering, and coolant. So I found a 13 millimeter open-end wrench down there on the car from the previous owner. So it's like fishing. I caught one. 13s are useful. And my friend came over with his dad's new 5,000 mile 2014 Shelby GT500, all stock. He added a front heat exchanger that says Shelby with dual fans and exhaust. Alright, brakes over. Time to put the serpentine belt on. Now, as I was doing this, I thought, you know what? I bet the fuel pump on this car is dead because it's been sitting for a couple of years and it's got ethanol and everything gummed up, and sure enough, I was right. So I got the car to start, but only for a few seconds, and all this smoke coming off is just all of the liquid wrench and WD-40 that was on the exhaust manifolds from when I had taken off the manifolds. And anyway, so that all needs to burn off anyway, so no big deal there. I was expecting it to smoke a little bit, and I was expecting it to actually blow out the rust powder and stuff that was still in the exhaust from when I cleaned it up. But I did get the car to turn over just a little bit, and I tried everything I could to make sure that it there wasn't anything besides the fuel pump. I even swapped the FPDM out of the trunk that I had, an extra one lying around. Still didn't help. I checked the fuse for the fuel pump. It was good, so I knew it was a fuel pump. And I really didn't want to drop the tank, but I was ready to do this. So I went ahead and borrowed the transmission jack from Danny Johnson, which is really nice. This works really nicely to drop down the fuel tank. And I did go ahead and do that quickly. I've done it before in like 1 hour on my sister's GT. I've done this several times, but anyway, got the tank down and decided to pull it out and see if it really had gas in it, because it was showing it had like 3/4 of the tank. And I wanted to vacuum all this out too, make sure nothing fell down in there. So I did drop the tank, and then I pulled the basket and the whole thing out, the fuel pump assembly, the sending unit, all of it, made sure that nothing was just unplugged or whatever. And then I took the 97 GT to the store and got the stuff I needed. And so, just as I suspected, as soon as I got the fuel pump replaced, the car fired right up. This is open manifolds. That's where we'll leave off with the update for now. I did burp the coolant system while the front of the car was up in the air, and we'll continue with this project. And thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy following along with this, and stay tuned for more updates on this car.